At the age of 24, I first installed the Tinder app on my phone. I hoped it'd be my last time needing it, but sadly it wasn't the case. As soon as I got on the app, I had lots of matches, one of them being a guy named Danny. Danny was quite the charmer, and his messages were clever. We connected pretty fast. He was this tall, muscular guy with short hair and a grin that could really brighten up a room. We decided to hang out and grab some drinks at a city pub. I was a bit anxious when I first got there, but Danny's welcoming attitude helped me relax. We ordered our drinks and chatted about hobbies, family, and our experiences on Tinder. Everything was going well until we left the pub and started strolling down the city streets. Suddenly, a man came out of nowhere and demanded our wallets and phones. He had a knife, which was very frightening, but Danny bravely stepped in, standing in front of me with his fists raised in a protective stance. The robber tried to stab him with the knife, but Danny was quick. He ducked, dodged, and threw the man to the ground. Scared, the man got up and fled, running off like a scared puppy. I said we should call the cops, but Danny brushed it off like it was no big deal. I kept insisting because I had a clear view of the robber's face, a young man in his late 20s with a scruffy beard and an old baseball cap. But Danny was adamant. He didn't want the cops involved. In the end, I dropped it. It was a scary event, but Danny had stepped up. I was thankful and admired his courage, but I didn't feel any romantic spark with him. I didn't bring it up then. He walked me home, but I bid him farewell a block or two away from my building, just to play safe. I could tell Danny wanted an invitation to my place, but I wasn't interested. A few days passed without hearing from Danny, and I assumed he'd moved on. But then I got a text from him asking me out again. I turned him down nicely, saying I didn't feel any romantic bond. I thought that would be it, but Danny didn't take my rejection lightly. He began sending me hateful and menacing texts. The texts were extremely disturbing, but I won't go into the details. I tried to reason with him, but he just wouldn't listen. It was as if he thought he deserved something from me just because he had defended me against the robber. I was scared and felt uneasy, wondering if he was spying or stalking me. I tried to disregard his messages, but they only got more violent. However, after a few terrifying days, the messages and calls suddenly stopped. It seemed like he'd moved on. At 28, you'd think he'd know how to handle rejection. Regardless, I was relieved it was over. But that wasn't the end of it. A month had passed with no word from Danny. One Saturday afternoon, I was walking down the street when I saw Danny approaching with another guy. They hadn't spotted me, so I quickly hid behind a building. As they walked by, I recognized the other guy. It was the robber from our date. At first, I was puzzled. Then it hit me. The robber was Danny's friend. He had staged the whole thing to appear like a hero, which explained why he didn't want to involve the police. Anxiously, I watched them stroll away, praying they wouldn't turn back. I can't help but wonder, if we had dated, what would he have done? He would have had to cut ties with that friend, or I would have found out about his scheme. I guess he didn't think things through. He had bad motives, and I'm grateful my gut feeling told me something was off. So I'm this 28-year-old dude, and this all happened when I was 27. I had been trying my luck on Tinder for a couple of months, but wasn't really getting anywhere. No matter how many profiles I liked or dismissed, it just seemed like no one was biting. Then, out of nowhere, I matched with this girl named Sheila. Her profile picture was a bit fuzzy, but I could still see that she was really pretty. She had this long blonde hair and these striking green eyes. Her bio was pretty standard, talking about her love for hiking, reading, and checking out new places to eat. Nothing out of the ordinary, but considering my luck so far, I was thrilled to even have a match. We started messaging through the app, and surprisingly, we really hit it off. Our chat was easy, relaxed, and we had lots in common. After a few days of this back and forth, I decided to ask her if she wanted to meet in person. She agreed and sent me a location for our meetup. Honestly, I didn't give it much thought or even bother to check the address before the date. When the day arrived, I hopped into my car and trusted my GPS to guide me. As I was driving, I noticed I was heading into some rural area, surrounded by vast wheat fields. No bars, no restaurants, and certainly no city life, which was confusing. I had thought we'd meet somewhere urban, with other people around. Instead, I found myself in this lonely, desolate place, the sight of towering trees making me feel a bit edgy. I tried to brush off the eerie feeling and continued driving until I reached the given address. What I saw was this run-down, abandoned-looking house with boarded-up windows and a rusty fence around it. Something felt off and a wave of panic hit me. I didn't know if Sheila was a legit person or some hoax, but I wasn't about to take any chances with that creepy house looking like a scene out of a horror flick. As I was heading back to the city, I noticed a car tailing me, honking like crazy. I tried to outrun it, but it kept tailgating me, even bumping into my car once, causing me to swerve a bit. I kept going, hoping it would give up and turn back. Thankfully, as soon as I entered the city limits, the car did a U-turn and sped off. I stopped the car and took a moment to calm my racing heart and shaky hands. I made sure no one was following me and didn't head home directly. Instead, I drove around the city for about half an hour before pulling into a gas station. I decided to message Sheila, but noticed her profile was gone from Tinder. It wasn't too surprising, but in the heat of the moment, I hadn't really processed it. I started to accept that I had been set up and the whole thing was a trap. A flood of questions filled my head. Who was Sheila? Why did she want me to meet her in the middle of nowhere? Who was in that car tailing me? What did they want? While I felt lucky to have escaped, I also felt let down and taken advantage of. My self-esteem took a hit. The only match I got on Tinder turned out to be some maniac trying to scare the life out of me. Who knows what could have happened if I had entered that house? After that scary incident, I decided to give Tinder a miss. I couldn't trust the app anymore and didn't want to put myself in danger again. So this is about something that happened to me when I was in university. I was in my third year, living in a little flat away from the university. I was on the ground floor of a 3-floor building. I had my own room and a roommate who I didn't really like much. We used to be friends, but had a big argument and that kind of ended it. I lost a lot of friends because of that fight. It was a really weird and hard time in my life. I felt pretty alone. One day, I decided to give Tinder a go, with the hope of meeting some new folks or maybe even finding a boyfriend. But I was also okay with just making some new friends. I went through a few profiles and then matched with a guy called Mike. He seemed all right from his profile, and he'd actually taken the time to fill it out properly, which most people don't. Mike messaged first and we started chatting. He asked me out and I said yes, thinking it wouldn't hurt to give him a try. For our first date, we planned to meet at a cafe near the university. We talked for a bit, but there was no real spark. I could tell he liked me, but I wasn't feeling it. After the date, I nicely told him that we weren't a good fit. Lots of people just disappear, but I think it's better to be honest. He looked a bit sad, but didn't kick up a fuss or anything. When we were saying goodbye, I noticed something in his eyes that was kind of creepy. I didn't really pay attention at that moment, but when I think about it now, it was kind of weird. Things seemed normal for a while. I didn't hear from Mike for a few days and thought that was the end of it. But then I started seeing him at the university a lot. At first, I thought it was just by chance, but then I realized he seemed to be following me. I tried to ignore him, hoping he would get the hint and stop, but it didn't work. Then one day, when I was alone in the flat doing some schoolwork, I saw something out of the corner of my eye through the window. When I looked out, I saw it was Mike, peeking into my room. I was really scared and called the cops right away. The cops came and talked to him, but they couldn't do much. Mike said he was just walking by and wasn't peeping in my window. Since my flat was by a busy street, the cops found it somewhat believable, but I knew the real deal. After that, I was always looking around nervously. I felt like someone was watching me all the time, even in my own flat. I hated going outside because I was always scared Mike would be waiting for me. One day, when I was going to class, I noticed him following me again. I tried to shake him off in the crowd, but he just kept getting closer. Finally, I stopped and asked him what he wanted. "I just want to talk," he said, but I told him, "I don't want to talk to you. Please go away." He didn't respond, but I could tell he wasn't going to leave me alone easily. So, I decided to protect myself. I started carrying pepper spray with me everywhere, and also learned some self-defense techniques. But even with those precautions, I still felt unsafe. I didn't know how to make him stop, and I was really scared that things might get worse. I shared my worries with my mom and sister, but they lived in a different city. After weeks of feeling like I was being stalked, I decided to confront Mike again. This time, I told him in no uncertain terms that I would call the cops if he didn't leave me alone. To my relief, he finally backed off. I don't know what made him see reason, but I was really happy to have peace of mind again. I could go back to my normal life without constantly being scared. When I look back now, I realize how lucky I was to escape without any harm. There are many people who aren't that lucky. Even though it's been years since this scary time in my life, I can't forget the fear and helplessness I felt back then. During the time this incident took place, I had been single for a while and decided to give online dating a try. As I went through a bunch of profiles, I stumbled upon one guy named Max. He was really good-looking, tall, and had the looks of a model. His pictures were so attractive that I even thought he might have actually been a model. But his profile mentioned that he was an engineer, so perhaps he was a model on the side. I was immediately interested and swiped right. Luckily, we matched and soon started chatting through the app. We clicked instantly, and he knew exactly what to say. Max seemed like a dream come true, and we promptly arranged to meet for a date. On the big day, I spent hours getting ready, wanting to impress this guy who seemed too perfect to be real. I arrived at the agreed bar and began looking for Max. After a few minutes, a guy from the other side of the room waved at me. He looked nothing like Max, but I waved back anyway. As I got closer, he introduced himself as Max. To say I was surprised would be an understatement. He looked absolutely nothing like the guy in the pictures. Those photos were certainly not of him. This wasn't just some photo filters or good lighting. This was a completely different person. I thought the pictures he used must have been from a real model. I felt foolish for falling for it. I should have known it was too perfect to be real. Still, I didn't want to be impolite, so I sat down and tried to make small talk. But it was clear that there was no spark between us, and the date felt awkward right from the start. He seemed desperate to impress me, and I found myself cringing at his jokes and stories. I was annoyed about being deceived. There was an obvious tension between us. We both knew what had happened, but neither of us brought it up. After 30 minutes, I knew I had to cut the date short. I thanked him for his time and told him I had to go. That's when things went downhill. Max threw a tantrum right in the bar. I walked out, but he followed me, angrily accusing me of rejecting him and wasting his time, among other things. I was shocked by his outburst and felt afraid as he trailed behind me on the street. He behaved as if I was the one in the wrong, when in reality, he was the one who had tricked me. It was the worst kind of manipulation. I tried to disregard him and walk away, but he continued to yell at me. He became more aggressive, and I began to fear for my safety. I was about to call the police when a patrol car drove by. Max noticed the car and took off. It was a narrow escape as I was about to signal the cop. The experience left me rattled. and I decided to delete my Tinder profile. It was shocking that someone I'd never met could be so unstable and threatening. He deceived me and had the audacity to get angry with me, pretending everything was fine. That guy had a strange way of thinking. What's even creepier is when I reinstalled Tinder 6 months later, I kept seeing the same profile with the model pictures. He was still at it, deceiving women, and probably treating them the same way he did to me. He didn't even change the photos. When I saw that, I reported him to Tinder. They took down the profile, but who knows how many others he has. Now, whenever I meet someone, I always ask for a recent selfie before we meet. That way, at least I can make sure that I'm meeting the person in the pictures. It doesn't guarantee he won't be creepy, but it's a start.